In this video, we're talking about your financial plan. We're going to look at what your financial requirements are in relation to the rest of your business plan. We'll look at the options to meet those requirements, including grant applications, looking for investors, crowdfunding, the different options available to borrow money for the business. We'll look at developing a pitch and, of course, what you need to do for the all-important part of actually gaining an investor. But the first thing we need to look at is what your funding requirements are for the business. So we'll start by pulling out your plans, and we want to have your vision plan in front of you, and also your business plan. So in both of your plans, you should have identified a number of activities that you'll be working on for the next quarter and for the next 12 months. So the first thing we need to do is put a budget costing on those. How much money will you need to see those activities through to completion? The next thing we need to do is to go back to your cash flow projections that you created in the earlier weeks. You'll insert the cost of those activities into the cash flow forecast based on when they'll likely be paid. Next, using the cash flow forecast, we need to insert the change in revenue and cost based on our plans. So, for example, if we said in the 3 months we'll be adding 3 new staff, then we'll have a cost for those staff, and we'll probably be paying for that cost before we can invoice for it. Likewise, if one of those staff will be non-chargeable, then obviously that will need to reflect in the cash flow forecast in terms of additional revenue. Now, it's pretty easy to put a cost on the business for every new member of staff, but how easy is it to put a number on the extra revenue? So if this is the case for you, and it's quite hard to do, then you can put an estimate figure for the additional revenue, and it's best to be conservative with this number. Otherwise, you might end up overstating it and come up short in terms of how much money you have in the bank, which is what this is all about. Now, with all these costs and estimates for extra revenue, it's best to build in some kind of contingency into them. So for your costs, you can add between 10 to 20%, and for your revenue estimate, reduce the figure by 10 to 20%. So also remember, this is about when the business actually gets paid rather than when you invoice for it. And for the costs, it's about when you pay rather than when you receive the invoice from the supplier. So that's exercise 1. Work through those costs, build in a contingency, add it to your cash flow forecast, and then do the same for your expected revenue. And when you've done that, we'll come back and see what happens next. Okay, welcome back. So now that we've completed our cash flow forecast with all the new expected costs and revenue added in there, along the bottom of the forecast, it will show how much money you expect to have in the bank in every period. And there'll be no doubt be some periods when the number is negative. It's at these times that it tells you how much money the business needs to operate. As with any negative periods, this is how much of a cash shortfall the business has. Now, obviously, if your forecast hasn't gone negative, then you can run the project without needing additional cash. But in most cases, especially if you've got big plans, then the number will have gone negative. And if it's not gone negative, but the number at the end of the period is close to 0, then perhaps it's worth playing with the costs and expected revenue figures for each period, just to see what the worst case scenario is, and then see what those end numbers look like. Now, after you've got these numbers, let's say as an example that you've got a shortfall of 50,000 in one period. Now, let's assume you can fill that gap when it occurs. So in the cash flow forecast, write it in that you receive the 50,000 and do it in the month where it first goes negative. Now, how does that affect the rest of the cash flow forecast? Does it become healthy for the rest of the period, or does it continue to decline? So let's assume it continues to decline. Let's say 2 months later, it still shows a 10,000 shortfall in cash. And then a month after that, another 10,000 shortfall. So in the cash flow forecast, do the same again and insert that 10,000 into the month where the shortfall happens. Again, does this fix the rest of the forecast, or does it still leave a shortfall later in the forecast? So do this exercise until the whole forecast is looking healthy again. And when you've got a healthy forecast for the whole period, then add the total capital input that's needed, and also when it's needed. In this example, let's say the total capital required is 70,000. So That's exercise 2. Go through the cash flow forecast and determine what the total capital requirement is.